Call the roll, not the order.
There it went. Okay. Carter,
Here.
Hicken,
Here.
Walther.
Here.
Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Alrighty. BJ has a nice fat agenda prepared.
We do have a lot to cover today. We'll do it as expeditiously as we.
You took the word right out of my mouth. Okay.
So you start to mouth that.
I was gonna say.
And Scott and I, and Zach will chime in too, tag team some of these. Scott provided a report that follows along in order with the agenda. So we'll work through these
Okay.
and present this and answer any questions and discussion that the committee may have. So with that being the case, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Scott so he can start at the beginning with an overview and outline of active development projects that we have going on in the city.
Thank you, BJ. What I did is these ones are the more high-profile or more major developments in the city. These are also what I've been putting in my council reports at the back with that kind of color-coded system that outlines all those. So as we start to flesh out that list a little bit more, you'll be seeing a lot of these on there, and then you can see how it progresses through the process from we're in talks to it's done, and then it'll have the date. So here's just a quick overview of some of the more major developments in the city. Like if someone had a shed variance, that's not going to be on here or things like that. But these are some of the more high-profile ones. So I'll be happy to answer any questions on those.
Okay.
I'll just say I think it's been helpful with the schedules, I guess we'll call it, that Scott's been putting in his council reports that talks about what these developments are, how many units, acreage, location, all of that stuff. So as, council may be out in the community and get questions about stuff, you guys have that information to be able to answer those folks. I will mention that I believe AEP has received approval for their engineering plans. So
Have they?
I believe so.
Okay.
So
So the next step in that process will be to submit for a zoning permit.
correct.
And they move on from there and begin construction, building permits, etc.
That's at the Job Ready site?
Yes.
That is.
I guess while we're looking through this, I'm getting ahead of myself. Hold on a second. Do either of you gentlemen have any questions about the current active developments for Scott?
I do not. I appreciate the update.
The next area, the job duties and for the various positions in planning and zoning. Zach, do you kind of want to give us a rundown of what you've been doing and how things are going?
Yeah, so I feel pretty comfortable in the position. Lately, I've been just meeting with any residents, developers that come in for questions. We get a lot of those. Handling all the zoning permits, reviewed over 250 of those since hiring. Also been working a lot on the Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals meetings and that process. I've been preparing all staff reports for those. And also attending those meetings and giving the presentation on also provide just daily support to the planning director and zoning clerk. And also prepare the agricultural district reports. Lately I've been getting more and more involved with the GIS program here. Been working closely with the GIS consultant Joseph Henderson. I have a meeting scheduled with them tomorrow to go over the goals of what we want to see and kind of prioritize that. Also, I am attending Columbus State to get my GIS certificate, just so I'm more knowledgeable in all of that, and I can increase my capabilities. Also, through GIS, I've been using that to create all requested maps, all maps that I think need updated, like the zoning map, that's completely updated. And the last time was,
Yeah, it hasn't been completely accurate since at least 1991, what we found. So, knock on wood, it's good at this point. But we've gone through everything and looked, and everything seems to be accurate.
And the same can be said for the discharge map. There are areas in there that needed to be corrected, and we've been able, Zach took the lead on getting that corrected through his GIS. Our hope is with Zach pursuing his GIS, and as the city continues to get more and more into it, that he's able to help across all departments then, instead of just being focused on GIS for the planning and zoning department, that he'll be able to assist, which will probably allow us to back off some of the consultant work that we're doing then through the GIS programming.
Well, that would be great. How far are you into that, Zach?
the certificate program, in the first semester, actually.
Okay.
It's only a 3-semester program, so.
Awesome.
And I took some classes at Ohio State, that qualified for.
Oh.
Yeah,
Transfer
35
credits.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Scott, what are some of the things that were on the large list of I can't get to, have you been able to start working on since you've had Zach on board?
We've done the zoning map update, so that was on our list, and I've included in the packet, there's the timetable that was prepared when we were looking to hire a city planner. And what I did is just put numbers to those. They're in no particular order, but when we look through the accomplishments and in progress list, this way it gives a reference point that, for example, under accomplishments and completed, it says update the zoning map. That was project number 8, so that's been completed. A lot of these, like with the deck, patio, and porch, there was nothing in the code that said how to approve these. So basically it was, give me $50 and I'll give you a permit. There's no real basis on which to review. So that was project number 5, which is code updates. A lot of this has been with developing department policies and procedures about how we go about doing things to make things more efficient and to make sure we're on top of things. For example, when you construct a new home, you have to get what's called a certificate of compliance at the end. And that allows the zoning department to go out and make sure, did you do everything you were supposed to do? And then developers are supposed to, or the home builder is supposed to do that, before the people move in. And then we're having problems with people moving in without doing that. Also, in conjunction with that, the utility department was having issues with meter pits not being installed correctly. And then what happens is it would be, for example, too high. And it's not if it breaks, it's when it breaks. And then it's technically not the utility department's responsibility to go up and change it, but they end up doing it. So with some of this, it was coordination with other departments to say, well, we can make sure you get an opportunity to go out and check that meter pit when everything is done, make sure it's in correctly, because before they would go out and say, it kind of looks like you're good, but
They
it
can't
was
tell
never
yet.
great. Yeah, so what we do at this point is we don't approve a certificate of compliance until they've said okay. And then on the reverse, people would switch the water from the home builder to their name. And when that was happening without the certificate of compliance, then we get too far in, the people live there, and then we have to do the meter pit, plus it didn't give us a chance to go out and check. So they're notifying, they won't switch water over into the resident's name until we've issued a certificate of compliance. So it's been working with other agencies, departments. We're going to do this with Southwest Licking Water and Sewer, and also with the health department, to make sure everything's installed correctly, because it gives I mean, at the end of the day, if these people paid for a house to be built, they're getting what they paid for, that everything's done correctly and properly. And the feedback, although sometimes we have people call and say, hey, what's going on? And the resident, we'd say, here's what's going on. They didn't do this right. So we're going to be out there and make sure that you get what you paid for. So a lot of people have been very receptive to that, we're checking to make sure things are done properly. So with some of these policies and procedures, we've outlined a formal code enforcement process that we go through steps, and everything is put down on paper before we would have. It was interesting that code enforcement issues never really went anywhere. You'd get a letter, and well, if they didn't do it, there was no follow-up. So we have a very specific schedule in terms of how we go about doing it and going through the steps, and that if people don't comply, there are consequences. We do everything to not get it to mayor's court. We have a 3-step process where the first thing is just knock on the door and say, hey, we have an issue with this. Would you help us out and fix it? And if no one's home, we have a door hanger. That also is helpful because if someone calls across the street and says, hey, my neighbor's grass is too long, when they can see that day that the city was out, there's the door hanger right there to say, wow, I got results. It didn't go into a black hole. Following the door hanger, they get 7 days to correct the issue. After that's a courtesy letter. It's basically, we still have this issue, please correct it. After that, they get 7 days, and then a violation letter that basically says you need to fix this, or there's mayor's court, and then there's mayor's court. So we do the process, and sometimes it's long, but we don't want to have things be too punitive that we're hauling people into court all the time, because I don't think that sends the right message, because we're not trying to be punitive, we're just trying to work with people to get things resolved. So we've established that process, and we've worked with Tanya, the clerk of court, to get things taken care of. We've worked with the police department to try and decide how all these pieces and parts function together. So that's been very helpful to get that resolved, and things are moving smoothly through there. We've also developed a tracking system. That way we know, the courtesy letter went out, they have 7 days, and now it's back up for reinspection. So it makes the process much more efficient, and we stay on top of things, where before you'd send the courtesy letter and then there would be no follow-up until we get another call and things like that. So a lot of what we've been doing since Zach's been here is trying to improve the efficiency of the department to make sure that everything is functioning as it should be, and then if they aren't, we address it and figure out how can we do this better. So it's always striving to do things better and do more. So a lot of these on here, like the new residential construction checklist, what we did is basically went through and said, if you're going to build a new house, here's the items that need to be on these site plans. Here's how you need to fill this out. It's been very helpful because now, it used to be they would send in a plan, there'd be 10 changes, we'd send it back, they'd fix 5 of them, we'd send it back. So this way it's, here's everything you need, go down the checklist, you can check all these, we'll check it, check all these, and we can issue the permits faster, and we can make sure that all the necessary information that we need on the plans is on there. Also, working with the utility departments, before they were approving water and sewer taps in driveways, which then if the utility department has to go out and fix that, they're tearing up the driveway. So we've worked with the utility department and said, move it out of the driveway, and that's been on the plans, and that's been helpful because we're not creating, approving something that's going to become an issue down the road. We've also required an erosion and sediment control plan to be submitted as part of the new home construction. This shows where the silt fence and things like that will be located on the property. We've had several issues in the past where those measures were not maintained or installed at all, and then that gets, mud, dirt in the street, and storm sewers, things like that. So that's just to resolve some of those issues. Updated all the applications. Now, before it would just have your name and your address, and honestly, looking through some of the old applications, as we digitize them, you look and it's like, I don't know what these folks got approved for. So was it a fence? Was it a shed? It wasn't on there. So what we did is took each possible permit you could get, made a form specifically for that, included the items they needed to submit, an instruction list on here's everything you need to do, here's everything you need on there, and it's been helpful because now you can show them the permit and explain everything, and it's all right there. Plus, it helps us on our end understanding this was for a shed, this was for a fence, things like that. I mentioned the coordination with the other departments. We've also, for Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals, especially now that we have the monitors, we've updated how we conduct those meetings and trying to do it more professionally and make it more efficient. We've had, in the past, for example, someone comes up and wants to talk about their property on the map, and they're trying to explain it, and then the folks on the board and commission are trying to figure out where we're doing it, and then you end up with everybody huddled around one desk pointing at the map. So this way, it brings it back. We can have them right here. We can go through. We do a PowerPoint presentation. Zach's been going out to the property, so if they request a variance, we have pictures from the property, not just an aerial. So that way, for example, if someone says, I can't build my shed there because there's a big slope in my backyard. Well, now we can go out, we take a picture and say, this is the big slope. And then that way they can say, yes, it is, or no, it's not. So we give them as much information as possible by which they can make their decision, and then we move through the meetings much more efficiently. So that's been helpful. Yeah, and then, we've also, with our staff reports, included more information, not to make it long and cumbersome, but we do, here's a summary of everything pertaining to the application, and here's a quick summary of how the code addresses this. So it gives you more information, but we like to do it, quickly and efficiently that, if you get a 15-page report, you're probably not going to read it, but if you get a couple pages that gets right to the heart of the matter, we've eliminated a lot of the questions that they would have before because we've been more involved in preparing better staff reports and getting them the information they need. So a lot of what has been completed has been policy and procedure issues, but I think it's important that we function as professional as possible and that when people come in, it's not a cumbersome process for them. I've met a number of people that came and said that, when they told me I was going to have to go to the city and get a permit, I was thinking, oh no, but they're like, after we met with you guys, it was painless. And that's the goal. That way, we're doing things the right way. We still have to get the permit, but we're not going to make it cumbersome that you'd think, I'll try without it and see where it gets me. So we've been getting a lot of feedback, positive feedback with kind of how we've changed the way we approach the public, how we do meetings, and we try to make things, we still have to make sure things meet the code, but we want to do it in a way that's not overburdensome for residents. So, do you want me to move on to the in progress?
No, actually, I'd like to stop at this point so we can just discuss a little bit. Mr. Hicken, you have a question?
Well, I got a couple questions. The first one is, Scott, I haven't seen a chart quite like this before. Can you explain to me, so I'm sure, when you're talking about dedicated time versus time to complete?
And if I can just, good point, because when we did this last year, you weren't on development, so.
Yeah.
Very good point.
What that was is we ID'd some of the major projects that we needed to get done in the department. And what we needed to do a time study to say, based upon the amount of time you can dedicate, how long do you think it would take to get this done? So, for example, for the corporate park zoning district, if I spent nothing and just locked myself in my office, I estimated 15 days. All the way out to 25% of my time, it would take 60 days. So this is kind of how we gauged how long some of these projects would take to get these off the big board.
Well, this was how we, as a committee, went through the process and kind of, before we brought it to council for recommendation to hire a city planner. So we had all the information in our hands to show the need. I think we was at least 2, maybe 3 meetings.
It
we went
was.
through?
Yeah, we spent significant time taking a look at this and just outlining how to present it to the committee as well. And then ultimately, as Mel said, the outcome of that was a recommendation to council. And I will continue to use this chart as we've assigned the project numbers to them, as we continue to provide updates to this committee and to council about the status of a lot of these projects. So.
I have another question, but I don't want to.
Good.
It has to do more with a specific item that you talked about, and that's your certificate of compliance. Is there a cross check with an occupancy permit? And does the county even issue occupancy permits for new build houses?
They do, and the interesting thing, because we explored that to say, will provide us with your occupancy permit, and then, trying to think that if they know they're going to have to do that through the county, they should be thinking about getting
Exactly.
through the city. Unfortunately, when we explored that, they'll have like a checklist for, electrical, plumbing, things like that they'll check it off, and once it's done, the inspector will sign it, but then he takes a copy of that back with him. They create a certificate of occupancy in the office and just put it in a file. The builder never actually gets a certificate of occupancy. So we approached it that way, thinking maybe that'll help them get going, but it didn't really work the way we were looking. So once we started talking to the utility department, it's like, well, here's a way that it helps us, but then it helps them as well. And then that way the left hand's talking to the right hand. But to answer your question, we looked, but it didn't really function as well as this is.
Thank you.
Scott, on this chart, I do remember this one, and we did have a lot of discussion about it. We're having Zach on for 6 months, essentially, roughly. Where do you think you are in let's just cut to the last one where it says total time to complete all projects. So this was a telling part of the chart, I think, that really showed us that there was a need for a city planner. And where do you think you are spending? Are you at 75% of your time on these issues, 100% of your time on these issues? Where do you think you are at this point?
I would say probably between 75 and 50.
Okay.
We've had a lot of subdivision activity, a lot of folks coming in and dusting off old plans, and one of the things we're trying to do is organize the office, because people come in with plans that might have been approved in the past, but we have to go through the drawers and figure out where something is, because there was boxes, it was all over the place, that we can't just go to a folder, open it up, and there's the information we need. It takes a lot of digging, and maybe it's over here, maybe it's over there. So we've had a lot of subdivision activity that we've been focusing our time on as well. So based upon that, it's pretty much we work with the developers, talk with them, do things like that, explain the process. So it's, if I'm not doing that or answering phones or things like that, it's right back to, at this point, working on those subdivision regulations revision.
Or any one of these other items?
Yeah, well, for example, like with some of the policies and stuff, it's working with, for example, like for the code enforcement, working with Steve Blake and saying, we're trying this, how's that working on your end? Some of those kind of things where we'll meet together and go over some of that. Zach was able to do the zoning map.
So you think the zoning map is completed at this point?
Yes, we do have some rezonings in the pipeline, so it will be, but I think we have a handle on knowing what everything is in terms of how it should be zoned. We still have the issue of split zone properties that we'll need to address, but our issue, because those are accurate, our issue was with the accuracy of the zoning map, because it would have something labeled as a residential district when it was not. So we have an accurate map. There's still some issues with the map, but at least it's accurate and we know what a property is zoned now.
Okay. Second question for you. You guys both have in your duties showing up for the evening meetings, the zoning and the P&Z and the BZA. Are you guys both coming to those meetings?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that that's necessary?
I think it's helpful, because there's some questions that honestly Zach may not be able to answer. And then I think it's good because we're here and, you know, I'm still involved with some of the applications and things. I don't do the staff reports. I do kind of a review with Zach, but he's the one who does the most of it. But me being here, I think, is very helpful, because we have a united front, I guess, so to speak, but we have a way that we're all involved in these. So I think it's best that if there's a question, maybe I can't answer, Zach can, or vice versa.
I do anticipate a point in time, though, where that may not.
Well, you probably can understand where I'm going with
I
this.
am,
Is I'm trying to get this to the closer to the 100%.
Yep.
Zach, or I'm sorry, Scott, you're working on these items closer to the 100% time frame versus the 50%.
Right.
That's all. I'm just asking those questions. I noticed a lot of stuff that's in progress. It's good stuff. Some things that, you know, 4 or 5 things that weren't even on the list, you know, a year ago when we looked at this, which is understandable, as you guys find things. But I think organizing the office probably isn't something you're doing necessarily.
No.
That's something, you know,
Right.
anybody else might be doing, quite
Yes.
frankly. And obviously, these are some big ticket items that we need to get completed and need to really put in the whole idea. And obviously, we were shown that a city planner was necessary, was to get your time into these other issues.
And that it has really opened up, because before it was, you know, meeting with the residents,
Oh, yeah, I can
staff
understand it.
reports, and it was just like repeat. So it's like whenever you could find a spare minute, we would go on to something else. But this has really allowed me time to focus on some of these projects, because the time just wasn't there before. But now it's really opened it up.
Sure.
And what I'll say, you know, my comment about a point in time, I think there will certainly be in the future, you know, as Zach is here a little longer, probably be able to turn him loose on a lot of these evening meetings to handle big projects or something. I can see choosing, you know, for Scott to be here, or maybe there's a reason for Alan or Nate or somebody, but reviewing what's going to be on the agenda and determining who truly needs to be here. I don't think it's time to do that yet, though.
I understand. And you prioritized, I'm sure you've gone through this and prioritized, you know, which ones you want to hit first, which ones are the most problematic, get them out of the way, get them off the list. It looks like number 5 is done, and you've got, you know, 6 and 7 and 9 and 8 all in progress. I'm sorry, 9 and 7 and 6 and 5 all in progress. No mention of 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's as I understand your list of what's going on. Okay.
Well, and I'll say, I'm pleased to hear that you're getting the policies and procedures and everything, and creating some consistency in the office. So things don't rely on one person knowing where something was sad or remembering the visit that they had made to someone. Those are really important things, in addition to the collaboration with the other departments. I think for us to really develop well and operate like we should, all of our departments will kind of seamlessly blend into the next. And it sounds like, from what I hear from all of the departments, actually, that's how you guys have been doing things.
No
And that
doubt.
ultimately saves us money, because we're working it together, so.
And that has been something that has worked well, getting all the departments meshed together, doing it. And I've seen a true benefit, and there are times even when, you know, the fire department will be called in. So it's not just the people here in this building that are a part of that, it's getting others involved too. So it's been nice to see, so people aren't just operating in a vacuum, looking at just their stuff.
And it's been because anytime we get an application for planning and zoning or board of zoning appeals, other agencies and departments get a copy of that for review and comment. That way, when we go to the meeting, for example, there was one where, you know, someone said, well, has the fire department seen this? No, well, maybe we should table it so the fire department sees it. So this way, we're getting all that information up front, and everybody has a chance to weigh in. So it's been helpful for us that we don't set someone up for failure, that, oh, we approve this, but that's going to be a problem. Plus, it helps the applicant, because they can see a list of everything at this point, that they've got feedback from everybody who could be involved, and now they know their next steps in the process.
Okay. Excellent. Any more? Go ahead.
You know, your items 1 and 2, I worry a little bit about AEP getting going and then, and bringing in other potential users in that area and not having those, 100% in place. I would mention to you that those look like they're pretty easy ones to get done and get out of the way. And with the idea that potentially there may be, or at least we were certainly under the impression that there was something on the coattails, I would say that those two would be maybe something to put on the high priority list.
Okay.
Hopefully, there'll be something that will be necessary to be reading those. So,
I would anticipate that there will be.
I don't know the timeframes, but
Understood.
it looks like to me we got, a few, like maybe a month to put those two together, and might be a good idea.
I agree.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, sir. Oh, I thought you had a question. Okay. Okay. So on to the comprehensive plan update.
Either.
So the next, and we've been doing, as part of the comprehensive plan, there's some sections that, like demographics, history, and introduction, that you don't need public input. So we've
Right.
been kind of getting those going on in the background, just so that we have those done, so when we move forward. With the comprehensive plan, typically, from my experience, there's a steering committee of residents, property owners, business owners, members of city council, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, that come together and work with city staff as we develop this plan. So from what I've seen, I kind of went through some old comp plans and some from around the area that typically have seen between 7 and 10 members, and it's usually picked by city leadership rather than city staff. So I think our next step before we move into the public process of developing a survey and holding public meetings and things like that, that we'll probably need to form a steering committee and get working with them to kind of get that off the ground.
My thoughts are doing it similar to the Charter Review Commission, where each council member would get to pick an appointee to that
Oh, I
board.
like that
and that
idea.
would become the steering committee for it. I think that process works well when we do it, and I think that then gets the ability for the elected leadership also to put people on that they feel would be beneficial on there as well.
Scott, and this would go for you too, BJ, for this, because that's a large undertaking, and it's something that hasn't been done in a while, from what I understand. It would be helpful if we had a timeline for a steering committee, like it phases, if you will. The first phase, us, each appointing someone or whatever, however that looks. And then what would be the first thing you would tackle and how you would go about it. That way it would be an organized process forward, because it seems like it's a huge project. So I want to make sure that we keep focus and kind of stay on a path and don't wander off somewhere.
Okay.
So I don't know, possibly, how long that would take you to put together, but it would be nice to see something sooner rather than later
Okay.
for that. Mr. Hicken, you have a question?
I guess I have a question. I do like the concept of how we do the charter review. How do you keep from having each council person assign an individual and then realizing that you have to add 7 more, and that because for instance, there's no representation from zoning appeals, or there's no representation from the zoning commission or council. Are you thinking that you would kind of hopefully have a council pick those individuals, or are you just thinking 7 private citizens is what we contribute to it?
I like the idea of 7 private citizens because I think they bring a completely different perspective on the community. We've got 4 different wards that we certainly have to take into consideration. I anticipate that council members would probably pick somebody from their ward, which would be their voice for their area to bring some concerns. I also envision that as we move forward, when times come, that BZA members need to get involved, or planning commission members need to get involved that their involvement would be requested at that time, not necessarily being a committee member. I don't want a group that's too big.
Yeah, that's what my concern is.
Yeah, I don't want a group that's too big, and I see strategic times, and you know, Andy has been through 2 charter review committees now, and I feel that, and Scott and I had this discussion as we were talking about, you know, what I liked about that was how they broke out in subcommittees also, and I see those subcommittees potentially helping here, but I do see that when times would come for, you know, if we say BZA or Planning Commission, or you know, maybe we even say the water and sewer district, as we're talking about growth in the water and sewer district areas. When those discussions need to occur, those people would be invited to be involved in it. I just don't want to get a group that's so large that it becomes difficult to manage and we have too many different voices maybe. I think that council takes the responsibility to assign or to choose who they want on that board, and that becomes the steering committee for it.
Does the, just because of do you have something, Kath?
One question. Is the steering committee different than an ad hoc? Because we have specific guidelines on setting up an ad hoc.
I don't know at this time.
And then the other question would
I'll
be,
just mention
do we have it in the budget? Because in the budget, for the charter review, you had it in the budget for that year for review.
Right.
So do we have it in the budget?
That's
I
what I was
don't think we do.
Um,
Or, I mean, I know we don't have a
I
specific.
think there
line
would be a
item for it.
number of things we would need to do. I mean, that's why I asked Scott for an outline of what he sees taking place, because I think we need to see kind of an overall how much time it may take with those phases, what phase you bring in different departments. I mean, and of course, it's all subject to change because you don't know what you may come up against. But that's where that would be helpful, so we know if we have time to, if we need to put that in the budget or get it approved. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just going to say, I've never envisioned these folks being paid for their time. You know, our ad hoc members are never paid for their time. The charter, you know, it spells out that they will be paid. I don't know if it says in the charter, but you guys were paid. But ad hoc, I'm not familiar with any ad hoc group ever receiving payment for their time.
That's something we can look into.
Yeah,
One,
it wasn't.
one other suggestion that I would make, is just because this is quite different than a charter review. Charter review, you can do some homework. It's pretty simple. I mean, it had a lot of work to it, but we could break it up and move it along pretty quickly. I think that, you know, my experience with comprehensive plans have always been that they've been sent out to a company to put it together, bring it back. Everybody looks at it, you know, that kind of stuff, studies it, and then gives comments back to that company. I don't think that that's the only way to do it. And in this case, it would be completely different. We would have our own residents or businessmen or whoever we would put on these committees. But I would make one suggestion to that is that, Scott, you would be the director of that, or the president's
Chair.
only word I can think
Chair,
of, president of
whatever
that
it
committee,
may.
chairman, whatever. So you can direct it. You can say, hey, you know what, I'm going to assign these to you, to any who's interested in, you know, learning everything you want to know about setbacks. And then that person goes and learns all about that and brings it to the committee. Or who wants to know all about parkland? Okay, great. That person's going to go learn all about that and bring it back to the committee. That's how I think. That's how I see this committee maybe potentially being put together. And then you can call in the utility department or Southwest Licking Water and Sewer or whomever that would be appropriate for that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I don't think you could leave it to, unless you found somebody who was a planning person in the community to be on that committee, to steer that, to be that chairman. I don't think you can leave it to the committee to.
I think this requires a lot of administration oversight.
It does.
Because
does.
it's not that other things we do are unimportant, but this is a substantial part of how we are directed to go
And it
forward.
could be some pretty technical stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
We're talking about it.
Well, and it's a different animal than the charter. I mean, the charter was bring it to
Oh, yeah.
council, council then approved, then the residents approved. This is approved by council and it's done.
Right. Right. So we'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. You can put it on your project list. Seems
What-
like you have room,
Yeah,
huh?
what we'll plan on doing is planting the seed maybe with the upcoming council packet. We can get this discussion together. I know it'll be discussed during your committee chair reports as well.
Yeah.
But get some information out to council for the upcoming meeting just to get the ball rolling on it. It's a lengthy process. It certainly is a lengthy process.
Well, and that's a short time frame. So even if you had a rough outline of what that looks like, and you could, maybe send it to the committee members prior to, so we had a chance to look at it.
Okay.
I'd be interested also to see, having never been involved with any type of review of a comprehensive plan before, what the different sections you were possibly anticipating, for my own
Well,
education.
I was going to suggest
Same, me
that Scott take a swing at some opinion of, hey, these are the sections that need to be looked at.
Exactly,
There may be
what I'd
many
like.
sections that are just fine. And we can actually see how big of a project it might
Yes,
be.
it's gonna be.
And that's true. There may, 75% of it, we say, hey, it's fine.
And for example, like the demographics, the last one was done in 2006, so clearly that'll need to be updated. But the history section, it's not going to change. So
Right.
a lot of times you can adapt that. If there's more information available, you can flesh it out more. But there's certain ones that I imagine can carry over from the old one to the new one pretty seamlessly.
And along the lines of what Mr. Higgins said, just for my own education, because I too obviously have not ever been involved in something like that, I would be just on paper to see what the different sections are, even if you wanted to put on there, like the historical side of things, and then you can say, at this, you don't anticipate additional work at this time or anything that needs to be added, just so we can kind of see the whole picture of it.
Okay.
Can I also make a suggestion, just for the three of us, potentially to look through it and put our own thoughts down? I mean,
Yeah.
I've definitely looked through it, and I definitely have some ideas of what I think.
No way.
I know, it's shocking,
I
but
would
I have.
not
I'll admit
guess.
it here and now, on the record. And so I just kind of put some ideas out there that say, hey,
No, I
these are what.
agree. It would be, and I just want the opportunity to look at it before we go to council with it, so I can, educate myself and ask, any questions or whatever.
Okay.
So that sounds like a great thing to get started on in your spare time.
They're on the web.
They're on the web, but we'll provide printed copies for folks too, because it can be, I don't like looking at stuff like that on the web. I get confused.
Do you guys have any other questions or comments for Scott on that particular topic?
I do not.
Okay. Expansion of CRA districts.
I will take that one. In your packet are 3 colorful maps that Zach put together for us that show, well, let me back up. The city has 4 CRA districts, one being the Corporate Park area, one being what is called the Summit/Taylor, Columbia, and then also the Old Village area. The CRAs are areas where people can submit and apply for real property tax abatements. It does not apply to personal property tax or anything, which is, we wouldn't have anyways. So these are real personal property tax abatements. It is in place to help trigger and assist with new development and redevelopment. The 3 that you have in front of you are both commercial and residential CRAs, so people with housing stocks are able to, or people with that want to make improvements to their houses can apply for CRA, and also companies, whether they're constructing new or remodeling. I reviewed these CRA maps, and it seems like certainly the areas that are in the bold are the existing. The hatch marks are what we're calling the proposed CRA district, the expansion of these. Looking at these, it just seems like there's a lot of areas, a lot of low-hanging fruit where I think that we could benefit from expanding these. These aren't areas where I see somebody coming in with a very large development that would get 100% tax abatement. These are areas where I see maybe some smaller type development, and they say, hey, it would help 30% tax abatement. A lot of that would be driven by payroll taxes as well. But, as you look through here, we've got the Broad Street corridor that didn't have anything, and we've always talked about development along the Broad Street corridor. The Mink Street between Broad and, or I'll say from Cleveland/Adams down to almost Refugee, that is all for M1 and general business. I see that prime for office space. That could be something that it could be beneficial for. And then as we look at the old village as well, we've got areas along Broad up near Kroger and all of those. Granted, by saying expanding these and making these eligible, it doesn't mean that everybody who wants to come in and put a Wendy's in or a Burger King would get this. These would be for some significant developments that would increase the income tax base, our tax revenue base, quite a bit. I see these as areas that naturally should be in a CRA and have that ability for people to supply, to submit for. In order to expand these and modify these, it would take legislation through council to amend the ordinances that were put in place to create these ones. It's a pretty simple process. It'd be 3 readings, 30-day referendum, and then at the end of that, these would become the new districts. I'll tell you, we've received inquiries in the past about some of these areas that aren't currently in the CRA districts. Specifically, I will say as we talk about the Old Village and looking up along the Broad Street Corliss Drive area, we've received some inquiries. We don't have anything right now to help folks. So my recommendation is take a look at these, and I would love to come forward to council to implement these amendments to these districts. It's one more tool that we have as we're trying to attract folks.
Mr. King?
Yes.
It's interesting that you say that. As I was looking through here, that would be one of the places that I can't imagine a game-changing.
These aren't necessarily game changers.
Okay, but it's got to be big enough to apply for the abatement, right? And it looks to me that looks like a very small section, so where there's a lot of houses there. Nobody, that's not what. So it's interesting that you say that because, and I'm not arguing about it. Just to me, that's counterintuitive.
Where we're looking is the GB area, where we have some pretty large swaths of land, I guess you would say, along Broad Street there. But yeah, these aren't necessarily the game changers, the corporate park type things. These could be, an office building that somebody comes in and they're going to have, 100 employees working in there. So certainly just because it is there and the boundaries are there doesn't mean somebody is going to get it. It would certainly be project driven, but this certainly allows us to have the ability to grant CRA exemptions if that was to occur.
As an administrator, do you have a set of criteria that you go through the first, initial screening and say, no, that's not, like, is there an employee number?
Employee numbers and payrolls, and, you can fluctuate the percentage of the abatement people could apply for based on employees and payroll. Certainly this isn't going to be for somebody, like I say, a Burger King that says, hey, we want to develop, and we're going to have 20 employees, and they're going to make X wage. That would not apply for it. But if somebody came in and said, hey, we want to build a professional office building out here, potentially to help support the hospital that's out here, and we're going to have pretty high payroll numbers for it, and we'd say, oh, wow, that makes sense to have.
I was about to ask along those same lines of a question is how, when you went through this, how you determine those areas.
I looked at corridors where I see that we've discussed development occurring, and also where looking at the applicable zoning that's in place along those corridors.
Would we have concerns that mirror the same concerns we have in the business park right now regarding abatements and agreements with school districts?
There are certainly, and this may not be a popular comment that I'm about to make, but there are certainly percentages that require only city council approval.
Well, that's a fact.
An opinion.
I don't think I have, other than I just want to be clear, what you're talking about is adding the
hatched areas.
The hatched area.
Yeah.
Are any of them
solid, go ahead, I'm
are
sorry.
any of them an expansion?
Of,
Meaning, right now, if you look at, let's just look at the first one, which is, looks like Old Town, the old village.
okay, let's look at okay.
So are there any place along that Broad Street corridor, does something already exist and you're expanding it? There's a small CRA at, I don't
These,
know.
the best way for me to say that, all three of these are expansion of the CRA areas. If you look at these maps, there's solid black lines. Those are the existing.
Thank you.
And then the hatched are where the expansion would be.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's where the legend comes into use, huh? We should have looked at that ahead of time.
My apologies for not reading the map.
I did the same
Corrections.
thing. Okay.
Instead of saying proposed, you should say proposed CRA expansion district.
That's where the confusion
District
came in.
expansion.
There, yes.
That's where the confusion
there you go. That's where the confusion came in, I think. Lack of use of expansion.
BJ, what do you foresee the timeline being for something like that to come to council?
I would, if council, or not council, if this committee was to make a recommendation, I would work with our legal counsel to draft up the necessary documents, and I would like to get it in front of council for a first reading in April.
Gentlemen, are you comfortable with that recommendation yet?
It would go 3 readings and have a 30-day referendum period then as well.
I don't know enough about it yet. If you asked me to vote, I know that I would vote. It would take me a day or two.
I agree.
Why don't we take this approach then? Why don't we take some time to review this and let it sink in? If anybody has any questions, certainly let me know, and I'll try to get out some additional information then as well.
I guess my only comments are the planned development districts and the residentials. I definitely am for the local and general business, but I don't know about the housing.
The housing's only for rehab.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not, you can't apply for CRAs for new housing. This is all for rehab. So if somebody has a a rundown structure and they wanted to come in and redo the entire thing, and it's only for owner occupied, not renters.
Okay.
And that's, and I apologize, I should have had some of that for you guys, but that's sort of information I can get out to you. And then once we get to a comfort level, let me know and we can bring it forward if that's going to be the recommendation of the committee.
BJ, can I make one more statement? I remember a citizen who came in and talked to us, that this particular citizen just happened to be on the wrong side of the road. They owned what would amount to a turn of the antebellum farmhouse on Township, a brick building, and I believe if it was in the CRA, that individual could have re-windowed his property. But he happened to be on the far east side of Township, and
I'm not,
it's the Moe's old yeoman house, I think, is on Township.
okay.
And I'm just asking,
This would not address his.
it wouldn't, because I see the black line going up Township.
Yeah. It only goes to the west side of Township still.
All right. Is there a reason for that? Is there any way we could? I don't even know if that individual. That was a long time ago. That was my first year on council, so that was 2012.
I see that as a natural breaking point for this. You know, without that, we'd be encompassing entire subdivisions, which we can certainly do. But
By moving it across the street.
and encompassing moving it across the street. In those, I mean, if we wanted to encompass additional properties over there, yeah, we could do that. Where we start looking at this is that it's not Brightwater. So I'm trying to think. The green right here. You know, I would certainly not want to encompass that entire subdivision in this. But if there are certain out parcels along Township Road that we wanted to encompass, we could.
Those are duplexes down through there. I mean, it may make sense to do onto the backyards of those duplexes.
Well, the duplexes on the west side would be in right now. It's just the east side of Township where it goes until we'll call it the western right-of-way of Township Road.
Okay.
Yeah. So the duplexes are in. But what's not in is the other side where you get into Breakwaters and the Greens and.
Yeah, and there's only, if you think, I almost think of it as upgrades to historic housing for the most part. That may not be absolutely correct, but is that, it can be anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, we can set the boundaries at whatever we want. The state statutes are what applied there. You know, we could make the whole city a CRA district if we chose to. I would recommend doing that, against doing that, not recommend against doing that. But yeah, I mean, if we'll take a look along Township Road, and if there are some historical areas that make sense, you know, a parcel here or there, we can take a look at that.
okay. It's just a question I had from way back when. I don't even
I
know
don't
if
recall that.
don't even know if I might be wrong. My memory is not what it used to be. Okay.
Okay.
So what I'll do is send a follow-up email in the morning with some of this and attach some additional information.
That'd be helpful.
Open it up for questions, and if you guys have any, to get back to me.
As I try to wrap my mind around exactly what we're talking about with the expansion and what it is,
Okay.
I think of, like you said, the gentleman who came in and said, you know, I had a house and it was great and I loved it. And then they built Taco Bell, and now my living room's lit up with neon lights all night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I worry about that kind of encroachment
Okay.
on residential area. So I would just want to be careful.
Yeah, I'll work tomorrow to get out information a bit about CRAs in and of themselves, and then what this means as well.
Does that blow a hole in your timeline for some, particularly? I mean, okay.
That's fine. Is all, you know, my timeline of saying, hey, I would love to do this in April is kind of just me hoping to do it in April. There's nothing pending, if that's the question.
Okay.
So the next time this group met,
Would be fine.
okay. Sorry, Madam Chairman.
If we
That
could
is
meet
okay.
in the foreseeable future.
Oh, you mean we can't wait till August?
You could, but, I mean, that's,
That might mess up your schedule.
yes.
Okay. Subdivision regulation update.
So I've been working with Alan Haynes, Public Service Director. He does a lot of helping us with review of subdivisions. We have Joe Henderson, but a lot of times Alan will take a look at things as well, and it's been very helpful having an engineer in-house that we can just go to with quick engineering questions. So we've been working on the update of the subdivision regulations. It's been a little over 2 months now, based upon the time frame. We scheduled about 6. I've included a draft copy of where we are. There were just a lot of holes in the subdivision regulations, a lot of holes with the process that it wasn't clearly defined. So just from my experience with the regulations and Alan's experience with the regulations, we're going through and kind of working together and saying we need to fix this and fix this and fix this. So we're moving along at a pretty good clip. I think we're kind of ahead of schedule at this point. But there's always part of the discussions where you go through and think, oh, we didn't cover this, or we need to look into this. We also attended, Licking County is updating their subdivision regulations, so Alan and I both attended a workshop because ours, we like the linear process they have and how they do things, that you don't move on to step 2 until step 1 is done. So they had developers, engineers, their staff there, just because we're kind of looking at theirs and mirroring ours after that, so that way we could get some feedback as we move through it. So it was good and helpful. We've started to include some of those things in here, plus with the feedback we got, we feel like we're on the right track, that the way we're doing it was received well by the folks at the workshop. So there's a draft attached to this. some of the way I do things, if there's yellow, that just is a way for me to highlight that we need to address this more, but we're up to defining a replat process that was not included in the subdivision regulations before, and we've actually had questions about how we go about doing that, so it'll be helpful to clearly define what needs to be done. It's helpful for us, and it's helpful for folks who'd want to develop homes, that we both sides know exactly how the process works and how we go through things. Also, we've had some homes were being built on streets that weren't accepted by the city, so we've had issues with that we're not going to have that happen anymore. So a lot of the things that we're doing is just issues we've seen that need to be addressed, and we'll work on from there. So we're moving right along on those.
Scott, can you just confirm the yellow is the new?
No, the whole thing, basically, we went through and started brand new and started typing everything down. So it's not a revision, it's more like a complete rewrite. So as we went through, when it's highlighted in yellow, it's just something that we said, we'll need to come back to this, but let's keep moving through. So the subdivision rate is pretty much a complete rewrite based upon things that we saw that needed to be addressed, how other communities have done that. We've used some of their information, so it's coming from a lot of sources.
Yes, sir.
Are you guys taking this opportunity to address some of the stormwater issues, the maintenance of the basins and such,
Yes.
and ownership, I guess?
Yes, well, we're looking at that to determine how we address that, how it should be addressed. We know we have to redo the stormwater section at some time in the subdivision regulations, but we're going to focus at this time on the process to make sure that's functioning properly. But depending upon how we go through this, we've understood that we need to put something in there to make sure it's clearly defined and who's responsible, getting maintenance schedules, things like that. So it is come up with these rewrites that we are addressing that.
Also, just a quick question, and I just glanced at this for a few minutes. Under 111308, you have for submittal of plans and applications necessary to obtain a national pollution discharge elimination system permit. You're not thinking that the city's going to go get that permit.
No.
You're just saying you want copies of whatever they're going to go get,
Yes.
and that's the NOI that you're looking for. You're looking for all the stuff that they need for an NOI.
Yes, we're saying you provide that to us to make sure that they've covered their bases on that.
Just a suggestion, yeah, where I deal with a lot of different municipalities, they require the NOI be submitted.
Okay.
And so just as a follow-up to it is, not only do we want to see the plans and the application, we want to see the NOI.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So, just a suggestion there.
Scott, what's your timeline for making this a reality?
We budgeted based upon kind of what we looked at 6 months, and we're in a little over month 2. I see it happening quicker than that. As soon as we can get done with it, we're doing it. So maybe
July.
2-3 more months.
And is the review process the three of us and then council? Or not us at all, or not council at all?
I think it's completely up to the committee, whether we take it to the committee, get feedback, then since there's a code amendment, it goes through Planning and Zoning Commission, or it has in the past, and since they do subdivisions, I imagine we'll probably need to go through that with them, have them review it, then it'll be on to council for full review.
I like when committees do make recommendations to council for action. I think that helps.
I was going
Or-
to say, flushing out some of the issues. I mean, sometimes it seems like you're having to answer those questions twice, but the information has been prepared and researched and available. I think that's why the hiring of the planner went so smoothly, because we went through that same kind of a process. So that's
Okay, yeah.
sufficient for you guys. Is that okay?
Not a problem.
Any more questions or comments on that? Okay. This should be fun. Dry versus wet options in the old village.
I will first say this has nothing to do with drainage in the old village. Dry versus
Depends on how you look at it.
That's
but
true.
okay.
That's true. I guess it depends on what you're trying to drain. So, I believe it was last year. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes.
This committee, made up of some other people, started to look into the old village and potentially having a ballot initiative to make either all of the old village or areas of the old village wet. And Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong in this, but everything that falls within the old village boundaries is currently dry unless they've gone individually to the ballot to get their own license. As we look at the old village and Main Street and some other areas, as we talk, there are areas along Broad Street, we just got done talking about that, or in the old village, that would, if, areas where I see prime for restaurants maybe. And if we had a restaurant come in and want to, Red Lobster or whatever, wanted to go there, and they wanted to serve alcohol, we'd say, well, wait till the next election comes up, go to the ballot, and see if you get approval to do it. I don't see that being a good business decision necessarily on their part. So we want to resurrect this issue again to see if this committee, as it's made up now, has any interest in doing that. Scott is working with Brian Zetz to refresh our memory and get information on how we do this. From what I recall, there are certain ways to do this. One is we can just say, hey, we're going to keep it dry, and if whoever ever wants to potentially have a liquor license, whatever level it is, could certainly go to the ballot themselves and put it on there and take their chances. Or the city could sponsor a ballot initiative where we could, define areas even where we would be okay. I shouldn't say be okay, where we feel it may be prudent to have the options for liquor serving, or we could make all of the village. I believe in the past there was some concerns with this on how we manage it and how we make sure that we don't have rowdy bars going in on Main Street, potentially. And I think some of that concern was with the approval process for some of those sorts of establishments. I think we would be able to manage it so that it does not occur with this. So Scott has been playing phone tag with Brian that's about this, and I wish we had more now. I don't necessarily see this being a ballot initiative in November. I think that would be bad timing for it, potentially in the spring of 18 or, the fall of 19. But I do think it's something we need to continually take a look at. And unless this committee says, no way, we're not interested in doing that. But I think that, working with Brian, we'll be able to put together
BJ, refresh my memory. Is it only the residents that live in that area that get to vote on it?
Correct.
Okay.
Only the residents in that area.
Because I think while it definitely needs to come through development, that is also something that we should talk with Suzanne Hayes about. I think I recall that in 15 was Dan on the committee?
Was.
Okay, because I think I remember while supportive, his response was, this will never happen, because there's people with very strong feelings about keeping that area alcohol free.
He was very clear with that historically the old village area is pretty conservative and would not necessarily be in favor of such a thing. He and I were texting about this, and we were going to get together, but talking to Suzanne as well.
Yeah.
I think most importantly talking to Suzanne about this to see what her take is.
And this is just my thoughts, is if we were going to try to get something like that to go through for the opportunity of restaurants or additional, we would really need to narrow it down to areas. I don't think we would ever get by with saying, want to make the old village wet. I don't think that's something that would fly personally. And I don't even live down there, but just knowing how things go, I don't believe that would happen. Okay. What are your thoughts, guys?
Well, go ahead, Andy.
I was gonna ask, I don't remember this coming up in last year's development committee.
It was 15.
It
Was it 15?
'cause
Okay,
I
I'm sorry.
I don't remember
was
this one
when
at all.
Dan
Don't even
was-
remember thinking about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was thinking we're still in 16. I'm sorry. I was
No, it was.
I was
it's been
thinking
a-
when Dan was on, and I thought that was just last year. So you're right. It wasn't last year. It was 15.
It was 15, yeah.
Sorry.
Excellent.
It all runs together after a minute.
Well, I just didn't remember this.
Yeah,
this being a
no,
topic.
this was, because it's been a minute since we've looked at this.
You're right. Yeah, that's my fault.
I think that Mrs. Carter is right, based on what both I experience and that I've heard, as far as a blanket type of exemption. I think for as an official acting in this capacity, it seems to me like you would put the corridor or the area type of a thing to the ballot if you've got more than one, or if you begin to get that interest from multiple places and say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to do 7. Let's look at where these different places are and talk about making this area quote unquote wet. By the same token, it's interesting that you mentioned, that you think that you can, if an area or a corridor were to be approved, you say, I think we could manage that, and I'm wondering how. I mean, how are you going to manage Tim's whatever Emporium, and then how are you going to make sure that me as the Emporium owner doesn't turn it into something that, I mean, I don't know what constraints you have once it's approved.
Process.
That's
Yeah, how I would envision it is, one way would be to make it a conditional use, that you go before the Board of Zoning Appeals to get your conditional use. It's a public process, so the neighboring area is notified. If that is approved, let's say it's approved and they go in and it's a problem. What we've done in the past is we can revoke the conditional use to go through that. That if it does become a problem and it violates the terms and conditions of their approval, that we can revoke it. So there is some safeguards.
There's a public process involved with getting the permission to go in there.
because as I look to the west, from where we sit even here, and some of the establishments that are, that exist that direction, heck, I don't even think I would be in favor of opening it up for that possibility for any more in the area that I represent or any other place. So that's where I would want to say, that's a great question. How do we control that? And what do we say, you can't serve after a certain hour, or you can, those kind of things are what I would have to know more about.
Or maybe it has to be a restaurant. It
Okay.
can't be a bar. And that perhaps there's a way that, we can quantify, this is a restaurant, this is not a restaurant, and if you're just a bar and all you do is serve beer, it's not a permitted use. But if you're a restaurant that you can get a hamburger and beer, then that maybe changes the game a little bit.
Okay. Not like pizza rolls and
Yeah,
a beer.
not microwavable food.
Right,
on a
not-
paper
not like
plate
a-
and
We have a bag
and-
of chips over here.
Yeah,
from
not
our
like
restaurant now.
our complimentary pretzels.
Right. I think
That kind of, okay.
I think we could define it that it has to be a restaurant, work on crafting the definition of what a restaurant is, and then only allowing those down there.
Because I'm going to tell you, I see it, looks messy for me. I just
does.
see, and I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm just saying that if we move forward in that direction, to be prepared to hear about it.
And I'm trying to remember this too. I don't know if Brian was our law director in 15.
No.
So we have a brand new law director to get input on this from too, on how to do it. And I feel pretty comfortable working with him to get that info.
I guess I'm struggling a little bit just thinking about this. Why would we do this? Why would the city sponsor this without some type of business current business down there that says, yeah, we'd really like to see this happen, or even some residents that say, we'd really like to see this happen. I'm just trying to, I know that we have plenty of locations for restaurants that can get liquor license. And they're not developing right at the moment. So it's not, I'm trying to make the argument of why would the city sponsor either a corridor or even a select, couple corners or whatever however you're gonna look at this and say, these are the areas that are gonna get, that can get licenses, whether they be restaurants or not. I'm just trying to understand, I'm trying to think through, why would we do that?
Well, and I had that, when we had this discussion, it was talked about, there was a particular building in the old village that somebody kind of had a vision for being sort of a pizza place / sports bar that you could walk to that was still very family friendly, but you could also have a beer. And it was within walking distance, and that was kind of, and the comment was, if that were the opportunity for somebody to do that, that they could see that happening. But if they had to go through the steps of actually going to the ballot, being such a small business and trying to fight that, they don't, it would probably prohibit them. They just wouldn't go through with it. So I think that's where it was, because I'm kind of along the same lines. I haven't heard a huge outcry of citizens in the old village saying, we want to be served alcohol.
I've heard none.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Big zero.
Well, and there was another example too. Somebody had talked about having like a wine tasting type of thing on Veterans Green, like with cheese and whatever for fundraiser purposes, but you cannot do that, and my comment was, go someplace that you can do that. but those were the kind of things that were brought up. So I don't know, have you guys heard? Do you have a interest in that?
From our perspective, I've been talking to some commercial developers, and they were saying, downtowns are really big right now. That's what we've been finding a lot of our activity with restaurants and things going in. And for example, the gentleman mentioned, I think he said, like right now in Powell, like they've done a lot of these in their old downtown area, and that's where we're seeing a lot of our activity on our end for restaurants. So I mentioned, well, our downtown is dry. He's like, you're probably not going to get any restaurants in your downtown.
No.
So I've had not someone coming in and saying, I want this piece of property, I want to do this, this is what I'm going to do. But I have had conversations with people about potential sites and mentioned that, so people stay away from the downtown from like a restaurant standpoint.
Well, I think it's bigger than just the downtown. The village boundaries certainly aren't just Main Street. There's other areas where I think, attracting those amenities that we're looking for. And what's interesting, the once you get out of the old village, which I can't remember, we're right about the boundary line for the old village, aren't we?
Here?
So from here west, they could all go there. It's the attraction of the amenities and trying to spread it out throughout the community for those who live on different sides of the city.
Well, and I would say, that something like that might be what would revitalize the west side of town. On Summit, right in that area where there's a few businesses, and with some updates to, the sidewalks and the streets and that kind of an interest could look good for over there too. So certainly not only
But that problem doesn't exist there, right?
Correct.
right. So
They can go, they just have to, it's wet, for lack of a better way to describe it.
I think some of the thought was that we would remove barriers should someone want to go down there, that the opportunity presented itself and we say, well, you have to go to the ballot, they might say, never mind. So it's just to open it up and remove some of the barriers for, like, say, a restaurant to go in the old village.
My gut feeling is that absent having multiple and it kind of goes back to what I said before, where you get 3 or 4, that's when you talk about a corridor. Absent having that type of, we don't have, if I understand what you guys are saying, we don't even have any anybody saying that. And I think that's what all three of us up here have said.
Wait until we have a couple and we're like, hey, no. And then
Well, just as far as you guys, just in our interaction right here, nobody said, well, yeah, we've had three people, but when we said we were dry, they said, we'll go someplace else. Not that hasn't even happened. And that would probably be where I would begin to look at, I think ultimately that is going to be key because, and so is the type of establishment, because you are going to have to convince the people who are going to have to vote for it, hey, this is something that is, that they want, that they're not going to be against, versus the threat of, okay, it's wet, and then you end up with, some crazy, some crazy place. Thank you, Andy, for
No, I agree.
abbreviating what
I
was
just,
gonna
I
say.
mean, I don't know that we'd find a lot of support for it, is my personal opinion. But if we were having to turn places away because of it, then that's a different argument.
I would actually go one step further. I think you'd have more questions from everybody down there. What's going to go there? How are you going to zone? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? If you tried to do something like that ahead of time, it's kind of like granting tax abatements before you know what the building is.
Sure.
And that just is dangerous, I think. In a lot of ways. Although I understand why you guys are asking it,
Certainly.
and it brings up. You think of Powell, you think of Westerville, you think of all. And what are they doing right now? They're rebuilding their whole downtown because they have restaurants that everybody walks to, and because they can't drive to them, and God forbid you ever try to drive there.
In either one of those cities.
And
Oh, that's a whole nother issue.
Oh, yeah.
so there's a whole that brings up other things which are fine if we go if everybody wants to go that route.
Sure. And part of bringing this up too is, hey, we have, I don't know if any of you were on development in 15.
I wasn't here.
I was not.
I don't know.
I can't, but brand new committee wanted to see what the feeling was,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. And I'm not getting a warm feeling about it. So
I think you would have to come with a lot more than just, it would open possibilities, because it also open
gotcha.
a can of worms. We talk a lot about people, when we develop here, wanting to preserve a way of life that people are accustomed to, and that the reason that they stay here. And I would venture to say that the people who live in the old village, especially in the downtown area, that's the quiet and the quaint is part of what the attraction is.
Right.
And the fear, even though it's 9 times out of 10 doesn't go that way, but when they think of having an establishment that serves alcohol, it changes the dynamic and the people who come to their area. I think that would be an issue. So, any other?
I'm going to throw something else out there that isn't on the agenda.
Okay.
So it's kind of other business, I guess, if we're done with the dry versus wet.
Yes.
I know that there's been an issue about building code. We had a recent building downtown that had some issues going through that. I would think that we would want to really attack that issue. Attack isn't the right word. Solve that one as far as how we go about when there's a question that comes up on a building or whatever. There was rumors that I was the structural engineer on this. It was crazy. There was all kinds of craziness. I got a call asking when I was supposed to be down there at 8:00 in the morning or something the next day. So it's just, I hope that the city can come up with a really good, here's how we do it. I agree with you. Linear, here's how it goes. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and it seems like the city goes to step 5, which is kick everybody out, and then we'll figure out if it's safe or not. And I don't know that that's always wrong or always right, but if everybody knows that that's the process that's codified, and we have it ready to go, this is how you do it if there's a problem, that would be a suggestion from at least myself, and I would hope the development committee would also agree that the administration, we really should have a really good game plan on that, because we do have old buildings, and some of them probably do need some kind of yearly or every other year, I'm just throwing out some ideas, every other year inspection done on them. I don't know that we do that at this point in time.
BJ, what were you saying?
Well, and I will say that city didn't kick anybody out. Fire department.
Fire department. Yeah, but it always gets so convoluted, so,
Oh, it did.
Because it
And-
lumps into one, people don't
exactly.
Oh,
see the
and-
difference between the
And I
city and the
just,
fire
if,
department.
if there was some kind of, hey, guys, sorry, but that's the process. That's what has to happen until such time, until you have X to resolve this, then you have a zoning
And-
complaint or a zoning issue.
And I will,
Anytime you
and I
have
will
it-
say, being involved, that was explained on several occasions what needed to occur to occupy the building again.
But is it written anywhere? Is it something, it's easy to rely on a code. It's easy to say, that's the code, that's how we do it. That's why we're relying on this, and it's tried and true, and applies to everybody. Because you know as well as I do, one person's gonna say that it applies differently to them than the other person. And I'm just throwing it out there as a suggestion to maybe look at.
Okay, we'll see what the fire code says.
There's not a whole lot in the code that addresses that situation, and I've never come across it before. But due to the, looking at the pictures and things, it looked pretty dangerous. And there was also discussions that the ceilings, the drop ceilings like this, were sagging because there was thoughts that there was bricks up there that someone would be sitting, and then the ceiling gives way and down comes some bricks. So the code is vague in terms of if it violates a building code or this or that there's some procedures to take, but it's not very detailed. And honestly, no one on staff is a building inspector. So
Right.
we don't have the expertise to go and say, this is okay, this isn't. So with a lot of that, we relied on the fire department because they had more expertise in that area, whether it was safe or not. But we kind of did the best we could with what we had.
Well, and that's
I
where
mean,
what Andy was saying comes in perfectly, because when you have situations like that, you also have a lot of emotion. So if you notice the problems that generally come out of situations when something is structurally unstable, which we have seen a number of times in our downtown area, there's emotion involved, and that's where the problems come in.
I'll throw out an example, and this is kind of like your example about the committees. Backflow preventers. City of Columbus requires the owner of a backflow preventer to get it inspected and to send in that inspection every year. Hey, guys, you have to go get $30 or $75 or whatever it is, and you send it. You're responsible for getting it inspected and sending it in. Maybe there's a way where you say, if you have a building that's deemed to be over 50 years old or over 20 years old or whatever, you've got to have an inspection done, and you pay a structural or a building inspector to come in to look through your building and say, I don't see any structural issues with this building. Send it into the city, it's on record. If a brick falls down, at least you have something where you can call the structural engineer that inspected that building and say, hey, there's a brick down, you need to come look at this, or I'm gonna need to do X, Y, and Z. Just a suggestion to try to give this some sanity.
Okay?
My thoughts.
Before we adjourn, I would just say that, I don't know if this worked for you guys, but I think that a format like this for everything that we're talking about in this committee is probably more appropriate. Finding a day where we could,
I agree.
I agree.
so
100%.
I think, I don't have a suggestion as to when, but that, pull out a calendar and we'll find another date that's similar to this that works.
And we can always piggyback with the utility or streets.
Absolutely, because there's
Because-
a number of us on those same committees, so, okay.
I
Motion
think
to
these off-council Mondays for our big hitting committees, development, utilities, streets, this works well.
I would say that the earlier in the day, the better. On off-council Mondays, on both off-council Mondays now, I have other stuff that I volunteer for. So having it at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock would not have been possible for
No,
me.
I like that a little bit earlier too. Okay. Motion to
thank you.
adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Kathy?
Carter,
Yes,
Hicken,
Yes.
Walter.
Yes.
adjourn.
Yeah, I got a phone call. Like, what are you coming down?